The first thing he noticed was that the snow on the porch had been disturbed, not by wind, not by an animal, by footsteps that stopped right outside the door and did not lead away. Welcome to Lunar Vault. Tonight, I have three true winter horror stories for you. The first one happened to me in northern Idaho a few winters ago. I was driving across the state alone in late December, trying to make good time before the roads got worse. I had been on the road most of the day already, and my original plan was simple: keep going until around evening, get a motel somewhere along the highway, sleep, then finish the drive the next morning. But sometime after 4 p.m., the weather changed fast. It had been snowing lightly for a while, nothing too bad, but then the wind picked up, the visibility got worse, and the road started feeling a little different under the tires. Not totally out of control, just enough that you start gripping the wheel harder without even realizing it. My phone kept throwing weather alerts at me every 20 or 30 minutes. Winter storm warning, blowing snow, low visibility, travel not advised. I probably should have listened sooner. By the time the sun was really going down, there were hardly any other cars left on the road. The highway looked empty in both directions, just this pale strip disappearing into swirling snow. I passed one motel sign, but when I got there, the place was dark and clearly shut down for the season. Then I passed a gas station that looked open online, but it was closed too. At that point, I started checking my phone again, parked on the shoulder for just long enough to find anything nearby with a roof. The only thing I found within a reasonable distance was a tiny cabin rental, maybe 15 minutes off the highway. It looked almost too small to be real. The listing had 4 pictures, all outside shots. A little square cabin with a porch, a single light above the door, and woods all around it. No reviews, which should have told me something, but I was cold, tired, and honestly just relieved there was anywhere at all to stop. So I booked it. The road up to the place was barely plowed, just a narrow lane through dark trees with snow already building along the edges. When I finally pulled up, the cabin looked exactly like the listing, except sadder somehow, more isolated, more worn down. I grabbed my overnight bag, ran through the wind, punched the code into the lockbox, got the key, and let myself in. Inside was one room, just one. There was a bed against the wall, a small table, a sink that looked like it hadn't been used in a while, and a little wood stove in the corner with a stack of chopped logs beside it. No TV, no kitchen really, just enough to survive a night in. What bothered me immediately though was how unused it felt. Not messy, not trashed, just stale, dust on the table, dust on the windowsill. The blankets looked clean, but the air smelled like old wood and something shut up for too long. It felt like no one had stayed there in months. Still, it was shelter. I got the stove going, sat on the bed in my coat for a while, and listened to the storm hit the cabin. That was the first strange thing, actually. The storm sounded louder there than it had from the road, like the trees were catching and throwing the wind around the cabin in strange ways. At some point, I dozed off. I don't know for how long. I woke up because something metallic was making noise outside. At first, I thought it was part of the cabin, maybe a loose gutter or something banging in the wind. But then I recognized the sound. My car alarm. It was muffled by the storm, but definitely my car. I pulled on my boots, threw my coat back on, and went outside. The snow had gotten so much heavier that I could barely see the front of my own car. The headlights were flashing, the horn was blaring in short bursts, and snow was blowing into my face so hard that I had to keep one arm up over my eyes. I hit the button on my key fob and the alarm stopped. When I got to the car, I saw the driver's side door wasn't fully latched. It wasn't hanging open, just not fully shut. Enough that snow had blown into the seat and onto the floor mat. I remember just standing there for a second, staring at that cab, trying to figure out if maybe I hadn't closed it all the way when I arrived. That seemed impossible. I always lock the car. I always check. And then I looked up. There was somebody standing near the trees to the left of the cabin. Not close enough to reach me quickly, but close enough that I could tell it was a person and not a stump or a trick of the storm. Just a dark shape against all that white, completely still. I didn't yell. I didn't ask who they were. I just ran back inside and locked the door. For the next few minutes, I kept peeking through the side of the curtain, but visibility was so bad I couldn't tell if the person had moved or not. Every few seconds, I would think I saw the outline again, then lose it. I tried calling, the call rang, then dropped. I tried again, same thing. On the third attempt, I actually heard someone answer, just barely, but the signal cut before I got out more than, "There's somebody outside my cabin." Then the alarm on my car started again. That sound, in the middle of all that wind, was one of the worst parts, because I knew I wasn't going back out there, not for anything. So whoever was near my car knew I was trapped inside listening to it. The alarm went on for maybe 2 minutes, then cut off. Then everything went quiet, except the wind. A few minutes later, I saw movement outside the window. Not fast, not aggressive. The person was walking toward the cabin. I moved back from the glass and stood completely still. I could hear boots on the porch after a few seconds, then a knock. Not pounding, just a slow, steady knock. I didn't answer. There was another knock, then silence, then footsteps moving across the porch to the side of the cabin. After that, the person started going window to window. I could hear boots crunching in the snow, then stopping beneath one window, then moving again. Once, someone tapped lightly on the glass with what sounded like a fingernail or maybe a key. At one point, I heard humming, very low, almost casual. That's what made it so bad. Not yelling, not trying to break in, just circling the cabin in a blizzard, humming softly like they had all the time in the world. I don't know how long it went on. Maybe 15 minutes, maybe longer. Then suddenly it stopped. No footsteps, no tapping, no humming. Just wind again. I stayed awake with the stove burning hot and the poker in my hand, sitting in the chair facing the door until I saw flashing lights through the storm. Apparently, one of my calls had gone through enough for them to get the location, and a deputy came to check. Whoever had been outside was gone. The deputy found footprints around the cabin and around my car, and then a single set leading straight into the woods behind the place. No other vehicle. No sign of why that person had been there. Nothing was stolen from my car either. The deputy followed me back to the highway, and I spent the rest of that night at a motel 40 minutes away in the next town. I never found out who that man was or what he wanted, but I still think about that slow humming sometimes. The second story happened to my friend Ben and one of his friends, Marcus. This was at a family cabin in the mountains that Ben had been to a bunch of times growing up. Usually, his parents and siblings all went together after Christmas, but one year nobody else wanted to make the trip because the weather looked bad and the roads were questionable. Ben went anyway, and he brought Marcus with him. The cabin wasn't some tiny little shack. It was more like a full house, just set far enough back in the trees that it still felt isolated. Big front room, fireplace, Multiple bedrooms, wraparound porch, the whole thing. Ben had always talked about it like it was the perfect winter place. Quiet, cozy, and usually buried in snow. The first day there was fine. They got the power on, got the water running, hauled in food, and spent most of the afternoon just relaxing. The snow got worse that evening, but not in a way that seemed too alarming, just enough to make the whole place feel cut off in a nice way. They watched a game, drank a little, stayed up too late, and eventually Ben went to sleep in one of the bedrooms while Marcus took the couch near the fireplace. Sometime in the middle of the night, Ben woke up because he thought he heard the front door open and close. He assumed Marcus had gone outside for some reason, maybe to throw up or get air or something. But when he went into the living room, Marcus was still on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, half asleep. Ben asked if he had gone out. Marcus said no. They checked the front door, locked. Both of them were tired and a little unsettled, but they convinced themselves it had just been some weird noise from the storm. Ben went back to bed. Marcus tried to fall asleep again on the couch, but after hearing Ben ask about the door, he couldn't really settle. He laid there listening to the house. The heating system clicked now and then. The fireplace hissed softly. Wind pushed against the walls. Normal winter cabin sounds. Then, after a while, he sat up because the front door was open. Not wide open, just cracked enough for wind to push thin ribbons of snow into the room. He got up immediately and shut it, then stood there staring at the handle. He said later that what scared him most was not the fact that the door was open. It was that he had no idea when it had happened. He had been awake, he would have noticed if someone walked through the room. Or at least he should have. Before he could decide whether to wake Ben again, something hit the outside wall of the cabin. Hard, not like a branch, not like snow, sliding off part of the roof. A deliberate thump against the wall. Then another. That was when he woke Ben up for real. The two of them stood in the middle of the room, listening while the impacts kept happening. Not constantly. Just once every so often, in different places. One against the wall near the kitchen, one further down near a bedroom, one near the backside of the cabin. It almost sounded like somebody walking around outside and slamming something heavy into the walls as they moved. Neither of them went outside. They checked every window they could from inside, but the storm and the darkness made it nearly impossible to see beyond the porch light. Once or twice they thought they saw movement, but neither could be sure. This went on for hours. Thump, silence. Another thump somewhere else, silence again. At one point Marcus said it sounded like whoever was outside was trying to keep them from guessing where they were. Just before sunrise, it stopped. When they finally went outside in daylight, both of them were armed with kitchen knives, which honestly would not have helped much if someone had still been out there, but it made them feel slightly less helpless. The outer walls of the cabin had long, fresh scuff marks and dents in multiple places. Not deep enough to break through, but clearly not natural. Something hard had been dragged or slammed against the wood over and over through the night. And the snow around the house was a mess, but there were no clear footprints, just churned up patches like someone had moved carefully around the cabin during the worst parts of the storm, when everything would get covered over quickly anyway. They left that morning. Ben told his parents later, and his dad went out a week after that to check the place. He thought maybe it had been a tree limb or debris blown around, but according to him, the marks were too spread out and too controlled for that. Nobody ever figured out who or what had been hitting the walls. But Ben said what stayed with him was the door, because whatever was outside was one thing. Whatever had opened that front door while they were both inside was something else. The third story happened to a woman named Dana who lived alone outside a small town in Montana. Her house sat out by itself with fields around it and only one gravel driveway leading in from the road. Not remote enough to be completely unreachable, but remote enough that if somebody came onto her property at night, they were there on purpose. This happened in early January after several days of on and off snow. Dana got off work early because the forecast was getting worse and the roads were starting to ice over. The drive home was empty, which she actually liked at first. There is a certain kind of relief in getting home ahead of a storm. But when she pulled into her driveway, she noticed tire tracks already there. They were fresh enough to stand out clearly in the snow. Someone had driven all the way up toward her house and then turned around. She looked around, but there was no vehicle anywhere in sight. She figured maybe someone had the wrong address, or maybe somebody had tried to turn around in her drive because the road conditions were bad. It bothered her a little, but not enough to call anyone. She went inside, made dinner, turned on the TV, and settled into what she assumed would just be a long, snowy night. About an hour later, she noticed bright light coming through the blinds in the living room. Headlights. She looked out and saw a car sitting in her driveway facing the house. Not pulling in, not pulling out, just sitting there with the lights on. She watched for several minutes. The car never moved. Finally, it backed up, turned around slowly, and drove back toward the road. That was when she started getting uncomfortable. It was one thing for somebody to come down the drive by mistake once. Doing it twice in a storm and then just sitting there with the lights aimed at the house felt very different. She stayed up later than usual after that, checking the windows every few minutes. Eventually, she convinced herself whoever it was had left for good. She shut everything down, locked up, and went to bed. Then she woke up sometime in the middle of the night. At first, she wasn't sure why. The wind was hitting the house hard, but beyond that there was this feeling that something was wrong. She got out of bed and went to the window. From there, she could see the driveway. The same car was back, only now the headlights were off. It was just sitting there in the dark with snow gathering over the roof and hood. She stepped back from the window immediately, and when she turned toward the bedroom door, she saw a shadow move under it. Someone was already in the hallway. She told police later that she went cold all over at once, like her whole body understood the situation before her mind could even catch up. Whoever was in the hall had been inside long enough to be standing there silently while she slept. She grabbed her phone and texted instead of calling. The dispatcher answered right away and told her to stay quiet, stay in the room, and not open the door. Outside in the hallway, she could hear slow footsteps, not pacing fast, just moving a little, stopping, then moving again. Once, the shadow under the door blocked out all the light for several seconds, like the person was standing directly in front of it. She sat on the floor beside the bed, holding a lamp in case the door opened. The wait for police felt endless. Then finally she saw red and blue light flashing through the snow outside. The footsteps in the hall changed immediately, fast now, moving away from the bedroom toward the front of the house. Police caught the man before he made it out. What they found afterward made everything much worse. He had been watching her for weeks. There were pictures of her in his car, some from town, some from near her property, some taken so close to the house that he must have been standing out in the field at night looking in at her windows without her ever knowing. They also found a gun, restraints, and a bag full of things that made his intentions painfully obvious. Apparently, he had been driving up and down her driveway more than once to test her routines, to see when she came home, when lights went on, when lights went off. The two earlier visits that same evening had not been random. He had been making sure she was alone before coming back. Dana said the part she still thinks about most is that stretch of time before she woke up. How long had he been in the hallway? 5 minutes? 20? An hour? She will never know. So those were three true snowstorm and cabin winter horror stories. A stranger in the whiteout outside a roadside cabin, something circling and striking a mountain house through the night, and a man in a hallway while snow buried his car outside. There is something about winter storms that changes the shape of fear, not just because they make it harder to see or drive or call for help, but because they make the world feel smaller, quieter, more sealed off. And when something is wrong in that kind of silence, it seems to get closer much faster than it should. So, if you ever find yourself snowed in somewhere strange, listening to the wind push at the walls and the dark press against the windows, pay attention to the things that do not fit, because in weather like that, the storm is not always the only thing outside, and sometimes the cold is just the first thing that gets in.